Welcome to Recovery Corner, where the many pathways of recovery intersect. This is a space where you will hear personal stories of triumph in recovery, gain insights into various recovery-oriented systems, and learn how leaders across the country are building recovery-ready communities. The Recovery Corner podcast does not provide clinical advice.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Recovery Corner's Recovery Corner. We are back this week with Aaron, with Lex, with Saraiha, with me, Meg, and we're excited to get into it. But let's just start off, how's everybody's week going so far?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Busy.
Busy?
Yeah. I'm on vacation later this week, so everything has to get done.
Oh, yeah.
Where are you going on vacation?
My partner's parents surprised us with a trip to New Orleans for my birthday this weekend, so it'll be super
Aww.
fun. Yeah.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
Happy early birthday and have fun in New Orleans.
I'm excited. I do too.
I'm jealous.
I've never been to New Orleans.
You have to go.
Maybe not in the summer, though.
I mean, it's bad enough here in Denver right now. It's been 90s for forever, and it will continue to be 90s.
Swampy in the south, though.
Yeah, it's bad. Yeah.
Am I right?
At least it's arid here.
Yeah.
All right, well, now that the chit-chat is out of the way, let's just dive right into our first news article for today. I believe Aaron is going to start us off.
Yay. I get to go first. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So my article is called "What Does It Mean to Be in Recovery?" And it says the subtitle is like, "We need a better federal definition." And this article talks about the confusion around the term recovery when it comes to drug and alcohol problems. The author believes that the government's current definition of recovery is unclear and might not be helping people as much as it should. The 2022 National Drug Control Strategy uses the word recovery a lot, but it's based on an old definition from 2010. SAMHSA says recovery is about people getting better lives, living on their own, and trying to reach their full potential. So the author of the article thinks the definition is too broad and wants a new one that's based on solid evidence and includes input from the public. So current definition of recovery from SAMHSA defines recovery as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. The funny thing is the author didn't show their proposed definition, which was kind of funny. I was like, well, what's yours? Didn't say it. So I think I have a couple of questions based off of this. What do you think the current definition of recovery? What do you think of the current definition of recovery? And do you think it's too broad? Anybody?
I know Lex really likes the current definition. She talks about it all the time.
So that's interesting. We talked about this briefly last month as well, right? I think. And I talk about this in my Spanish episodes as well, because I think that the current definition of recovery makes it more accessible for people to resonate and relate with the concept of recovery, especially when if you think about it from a broad lens, and it is a broad concept, right? But if you're thinking about it specifically with substance use in mind, it's like, okay, yeah, like I can relate with that, right? And I've spoken about this in the past, is like, I lived in Miami for 8 years. Like I had experiences with substances, and I transitioned out of the kind of experiences that I was having into a healthier, more self-directed life, right? Did I struggle with a substance use disorder in the sense of having to go to treatment, doing detox? No. So I also understand that, like, if we are really trying to focus in or narrow the recovery community down into, how we speak of a specific community and how we support that community, then maybe I don't fit within that definition. But it does help me feel connected to the recovery community to like relate and resonate with the current definition and my own experiences of substance use and where I am today. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like that definition, the current definition, is very destigmatizing because more people can relate to it. And when we talk about rewriting the definition to be more specific to recovery, then that brings in the question, how do you incorporate paths that are not abstinence only?
Yeah.
Because, of course, here at YPR, like, we accept all pathways, moderation, harm reduction, abstinence, like everything that helps you live a more fulfilling life and a healthier life in recovery. So I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence about this, but my main point is that it needs to be broad enough to include things that are not just abstinence.
I have a rebuttal.
Definitely.
So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I definitely see where the author's coming from a little bit from like a medical, like academic lens. It is very broad, right? And academics love to have numbers for everything and statistics for everything. And because it's such a broad definition, that's not necessarily possible all of the time. So I definitely see like from their perspective where they might be coming from. But as a person who works in this field and works in recovery and is an ally of those in recovery, I definitely agree with Meg and Lex, especially Meg's point about abstinence only methods. I think if that's just such a narrow way to define recovery, I don't think that, on the other hand, that's too narrow. You know what I mean?
I think the one thing that, just as like devil's advocate for this specific, one of the pieces in the article, the argument is for like policy and programming that is specific for drug and alcohol problems. And so with a broader definition of recovery, thus is the funding. And you start to kind of pigeonhole yourself into a lack of funding or a lack of buy-in when you are that broad. So that's kind of they measure it against other like disorders and health like breast cancer or MS or things like that, where the funding is very, very specific, more impactful, I guess they're saying, because it's directed specifically. And so when you are that broad, the cause is broader versus, someone that is that needs that specific support. And that is the cause to define like what this actually means. So food for thought. I'm not on the fence at all. I just thought it was a very interesting article. And yeah, I wanted to bring it up and talk about it. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that could be also like within our organization, it might be a fun activity for all of us to do to redefine recovery and send it over to the people who are asking for this, and all of our listeners too, right? To see what we can come up with that kind of fits into that narrow and broad. I don't know if that makes sense, but to be able to do both, right? To support the recovery community that doesn't necessarily associate with having a substance use disorder, and allies, and also those that that needed medically assisted treatment, right? And that are following different pathways of recovery, such as harm reduction as well. Because I do believe that that's a great point, Meg, that we don't want recovery to be focused on abstinence because we know that that's not effective.
Yeah, exactly. And that is not to say that abstinence doesn't work for a lot of people. It absolutely does. But what about the people who used to drink a whole bottle of vodka a day, for example, and now they have a glass of wine with dinner twice a week?
Exactly.
Like, that is recovery. That is healthier, and that is just like enjoying it like, for taste, probably, as opposed to drinking to drink. And when we focus on abstinence only, like, do you drink, yes or no? That is not helping anybody, because that person who went from a bottle a day to a glass twice a week, like, that's a huge difference. And that definition of do you drink would not count them as being in recovery when they clearly are.
Yeah, it doesn't acknowledge their effort, right? Or their journey.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's move on to our next article. Saraiha, I believe you go second most weeks. Are you ready to talk now?
Sure. Yeah. Awesome. So I actually have something really exciting to talk about. And it's actually not in the US, which is weird, but Scotland this just a couple of weeks ago came out with a very interesting proposal to essentially decriminalize all substances just across all of Scotland. And it was just fascinating. They actually can't do it themselves because they need the UK's approval to make that kind of large policy change. But something that their DEA policy minister said was, quote unquote, the global war on drugs has failed in its objectives. To improve and save lives, we must be innovative, bold, and radical. We are clear that nothing should be considered off the table. We must start by recognizing that no country anywhere in the world has successfully succeeded in eliminating drug use. A fairer, safer, and healthier country must come about all its citizens and be inclusive of those whose with health conditions such as drug dependence. So I was just fascinated. It's not very often that Scotland comes out and says something very new and very like outside of what the UK is already doing. So it's really, really exciting that they were able to work together to submit this policy proposal in general, and that this is the issue that Scotland is taking a stand for. It's super exciting. That's what I got.
Yeah, I would just want to start off by saying that, yes, the war on drugs has absolutely failed. I mean, especially with the rise of opioids. I know the war on drugs kind of started with more of the crack epidemic, but after all of the happenings with the Sackler family and OxyContin going on the market and that just being super, super abused because it was overprescribed for so long, like, the war on drugs didn't do anything to help anybody. And actually, National Overdose Awareness Day here in the US is at the very end of this month. It's on the 31st of August. So I was just looking into some statistics on overdose recently, and overdoses have doubled in the past. I think since 2016, it went from 52,000 to 106,000. And that is well after the beginning of the war on drugs. So it's not doing anything. It's not helping anybody. Things have just been getting worse. So it seems pretty clear that it's time to change directions and try something different.
I agree. Yeah. We've been doing things the same way for a very long time globally. I think most of the world really followed like our charge on the whole war on drugs back in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and it hasn't worked. It failed in every goal it set for itself. And I think it's definitely time to just recognize that so that we can move on and start, like Scotland is doing, really investigating the problem and thinking about solutions that might actually work and be effective.
So would it then just turn, instead of criminalization, would it turn into like medical, I guess? Is that the switch over, instead of decriminalizing it and then more medical help?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
they said that their goal is to create a society where this is their quote, problematic drug use is treated as a health and not a criminal matter. Which is essentially what it should be, right? So exactly that. So I think that in this policy, we're going to see hopefully a lot more funding towards, recovery services, and a lot more, policy that really gets to some of those like underlying social determinants of mental health. You know what I mean? I think that's really the point of view that they're trying to take on this, which is great.
That's awesome, because right now, especially in the US, I feel like a lot of our drug policy is very reactivist, and there is a lot of looking into prevention beyond scare tactics and DARE in schools, and DARE has been shown to be ineffective. So clearly I'm glad that Scotland is looking into it and trying to like really investigate the problem, but why can't we do that too? Why aren't we doing that? It's
Yeah.
frustrating.
I hope that. Go ahead.
I want to say I love how Saraiha is bringing in the international news. If I'm not mistaken, the first episode we did was about labels, right, on alcohol, and I forget what country.
I did that one.
You did that one. Okay, cool. So yeah, we are bringing in some international perspective here.
So I think that's super cool. I mean, do we have a YPR chapter that's ready to move to Scotland? Because you're going to need some support services, right?
Oh,
They will need it. Yeah, they will need it. I'm really,
YPR, let's go.
yeah, I'm really hoping that this policy, once it really gets under, hopefully that they're able to work everything out with the UK and they're able to actually move forward. But if they are, I really, really think that it could be the first catalyst to seeing other first world Western nations making those same changes. Because honestly, it's going to be really embarrassing if Scotland solves a problem that we haven't solved ourselves. Like in the United States, we don't like to be embarrassed. That's just not how it works. So hopefully, even the announcement, maybe they're already working on something similar here just to beat them to it, because that seems like something we do.
We can hope so. Saraiha, do you know if that proposed Scottish model would be similar to the current Portuguese model?
I am not sure. I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
For listeners who may not know, currently in Portugal, all drugs are decriminalized. But if somebody is a repeat offender, quote unquote, like they're constantly caught with substances, they are sent to rehab that the state pays for, that the nation pays for. So instead of putting people into jail, they're getting people into treatment and helping them with costs and everything that we in the United States have as barriers to seeking that treatment.
And also, oh my gosh, I've never heard of this. I did not know this, but think about what that might mean for the field, like for workers who work in recovery, right? Here in the United States, we're seeing a lot of like people who have masters in social works and like all of these, they can't afford to work in recovery here because they're so underpaid, right? But in that model, where instead of funneling that money into criminal justice and into incarceration, we funnel it into recovery, then it also means that there's more professionals who are passionate about this problem who are working in the field that they're passionate about, which is something that unfortunately a lot of people are not able to do here. Like a lot of people who are passionate about recovery just can't afford to work in this field, right? And so that's really exciting. That's a totally different perspective, but that's so cool.
I wonder what
I've always liked the Portuguese model.
Yeah, I wonder what the data on overdose and youth substance use is compared to in the United States.
I'm not sure. I would have to look that up, but I imagine it's better. I
Yeah,
imagine it's easier for people to get into recovery, so more people do and stay in recovery.
maybe that's
I'd
a
have to
conversation
look up the exact numbers though.
for next month. Yeah.
All right, I believe Lex is next.
Cool. All righty. So this was an interesting one because I found some kind of like controversial um data or just kind of confusing data in this. Okay, so ADHD drugs won't raise risk for illicit drug use later, is what the article is called. And essentially, a new study finds that teens who use stimulant medication like Ritalin to treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, do not have an increased risk of illicit drug use later. Okay. The study looked specifically at cocaine and methamphetamine use. High school seniors who use stimulant therapy were no more likely to use cocaine or methamphetamine as young adults, ages 19 to 24, than their peers who didn't use stimulant therapy. So let's start there because then I have some other points to bring up. Any kind of initial thoughts? And the article is also meant to comfort parents, as it says, so parents can be comforted that their kids are safe when using these stimulants.
That's exactly what my first thought was, is that I think even I've always had that kind of like that sort of thought process that like this could lead to this, or that this is good, like kids who need this medication need the medication, but while taking it, be aware, you know what I mean? So that's very interesting.
I was just gonna say those medications can be drugs of abuse. There are people who take Adderall and Ritalin who are not prescribed it, but they're also prescription medications, and there are people who need them. So, if you need it, you should be able to take it and not have to worry. Especially now, I'm glad that there's data that backs it up, that it's not going to lead to other stimulant use down the line. We talked about this a little in last month's recovery corner episode, but ADHD just as a disorder already makes people a little more prone to substance use because of impulse control issues and the need for instant gratification, et cetera, et cetera. But that seems a little disconnected from this substance, this Adderall, Ritalin, this medication that is supposed to mitigate those symptoms. So you would actually think it would help people with ADHD to not go down a path of substance misuse.
And so there's the curious thing, right? So if used correctly, it will maybe even prevent substance use disorder. So I found another data point. So I was like, okay, who's the researcher behind this? Because I always ask that when it comes to big pharma, right, research studies. And it's Sean Esteban Maccabi, and he is from the University of Michigan, Director, Professor, Center for the Study of Drugs, Alcohol, Smoking, and Health Department of Health, Behavior, and Biological Sciences. Okay, and so then I saw some articles that he had published or that he's referenced in CNN, the National Institute of Health, NBC. So there's a bunch of articles. And one of them is study 1 in 4 teens in some schools may be misusing ADHD meds. And those who misuse the medication have a higher percentage of then falling into a substance use disorder or misusing other stimulants.
That
That
makes sense to me.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. I think it's super important for the educational aspect of all this. Like, that's the one thing I got out of everything, the importance of educating parents.
Yeah.
And like, hey, here are the facts, but also like there's different ways this can go, but like here's complete education, because I think there's a lack of that, knowing what is what affects what, how. So education is super key.
Yeah, and
also-
especially back to the point I made earlier that unmedicated, untreated ADHD can have those impulse control issues, instant gratification needs that could lead to further substance use. So, I wouldn't be surprised if many parents were very hesitant to allow their child with ADHD to go on those medications because they have this image in their mind, this thought, people always used to say like, oh, Adderall's only like one molecule off from meth. So the parent hears that, they're not going to want their kid to be on that. But then if they're educated and they know that this medication will actually help treat the ADHD and potentially make their child less likely to develop substance use issues down the line, more parents would be willing to give their child the medication that they need, medication they're prescribed, with fewer hesitations and just less reluctance.
And hopefully that education would also help parents teach their kids how to take the medication correctly as it's prescribed, to lower that number of kids who are misusing it.
Yeah. I think a big issue I hear about when kids are being prescribed with ADHD medication kind of as a default without really like addressing any other kind of physical or mental concerns, perhaps. I've talked about the gut health, right? And there's a lot of research that connects with gut health and ADHD and autism. And my concern sometimes is that psychiatrists prescribe a really high amount for really young kids. And then what does that do to their cognitive development, or again, right? Like, what does that do in the long term in terms of how they use or misuse substances or just in general?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I feel like other interventions should be considered before medication. Generally, I think medication should be like not a last resort. That sounds very extreme, but I think that there are other things that you can try first, like talk therapy, for example, or like giving them other strategies to manage their ADHD. I mean, I know those don't always work.
Like understanding
It
how
doesn't
much.
matter how many times somebody tells me to get a planner. I will use it for 1 week and then it just like sits on my desk and adds to my ADHD mess forever. You know? So sometimes medication is a solution, but it shouldn't be the first thing that you try.
Especially at a very high milligram, right? A very high dosage. I also like, I want to bring awareness to like if does the kid have ADHD, or are they just eating a lot of sugar during the day too? Because that affects concentration and hyperactivity.
People do not realize how much like processed food and the processed food
Uh,
industry, this is something I'm still learning, and like I'm still deconstructing my own trauma around all of this. I've struggled with eating disorders my whole life, and I like was raised on processed food, right? Like I did not have whole foods in my diet as a child whatsoever. It was just not offered to me. So not only was I afraid of whole foods when I was finally like exposed to them, I was like terrified of vegetables and like all of it, and I'm still like working through it. But also it contributed to my mental health problems that I had as a kid, because I was constantly sick. I was constantly not feeling well. And I was gaining weight and like all of these things. Like it was just like the perfect storm. I don't think parents realize how much processed food is just awful for you. It wreaks havoc on your entire system from top to bottom, and people don't know it. And it's like the number one type of food that we're offered everywhere we go. And it's the cheapest, most accessible kind of food we have. So bad. It's awful. I could talk for hours.
There's a lot of discussion around whether or not ADHD is overdiagnosed. And I'm not educated enough on that to know if that is the case. But it's also just possible that it was underdiagnosed before.
It's also possible. I read a book about this, about ADHD, and it basically, the hypothesis in the book was that the modern system that we live in now is so focused on profit and productivity that we're diagnosing people with ADHD because they're not able to like meet the standard of productivity that our society has set. But also maybe the problem is that standard of productivity is irrational, right? Because like back in like the 50s, when the 40-hour work week was developed, imagine you had a stay-at-home wife or a stay-at-home mom who was like able to like cook and clean and like do all of those responsibilities for you, right? So you only had to work 8 hours a day. But now we all work, men, women alike, everybody mostly works. So when we come home from work, we have to clean and cook and take care of ourselves and all of these things. So now that 40-hour work week is not as feasible as it was before, because we don't have, like, most households do not have a live-in person who can just stay home and take care of the house and take care of kids and all of that stuff. So it can make people feel like they just can't keep up. And it's not that they can't keep up, it's that it isn't realistic. That's one theory about it.
No, I think that's a great point, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with one of my best friends who is in sales. And she's like, Alexis, she's like, I'm competing with people who take, Adderall during the day and then Xanax at night, and they're the highest productivity during the day, and then they take a pill to fall asleep. And she's like, and I can't keep up by like trying. She does breath work, she has her holistic ways, and she has ADD. But she's like comparing herself to people who are highly medicated, who are within the same field. And she's like, I can't keep up unless I'm on the same path as them, basically.
It's not possible. And so what happens is like, you have to choose one. You're either successful in work or you're successful in life. And that means that like there's one category of your life where society thinks you're failing. And that's awful. The book, by the way, is called ADHD Does Not Exist, which is like definitely worth the read. That's the whole hypothesis that they're pointing out, is that it's like a societally created problem, and it's fascinating. Again, I'm not a researcher, so I'm not qualified to like say what is or is not, but the book is worth the read for sure, especially if you or somebody that you love has ADHD.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that we live in a highly stimulating environment digitally. We consume 100 times more information, if not more, than we did 20 years ago. So
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's always like we can't escape it. There's always advertisements, there's always bright colors. Like there's no way to get away from it, So like there's no way to de-stimulate ourselves in our modern society. It's so interesting.
Wow. Very good point. That's fascinating. I might have to read that book now.
I'm curious.
All right, so let's move on into our final article for the day, my article. And the title of this article is U.S. Atheist Inmate Can't Be Forced into Substance Abuse Program, Judge Rules. And it is basically what the title is. So there's this man who is in prison in West Virginia. And in the past, he had had a substance use disorder. He had been in treatment and he had been in recovery for 4 years already by the time he got to prison. So he was not actively using substances. Substances were not a contributing factor to the crime that he committed. It was just something that was in the background that he was already handling and dealing with. But when he got to prison, he was forced into the prison substance abuse treatment program. And first of all, he didn't 100% need it. It would have been better if he could still have some kind of access to the treatment he was already receiving, whether that was an individual therapist or whatever it may have been. But that treatment program that he was forced into was also heavily, heavily reliant on religion. Like they used a bunch of AA tactics, although it wasn't exactly AA, but it used the AA book. And for our listeners who may be familiar with AA, you would know that AA includes steps that say, like, you need to give God control of your life, or the AA book has, there's a quote in the AA book that says, agnostics and atheists are basically doomed to drink, which is, first of all, a crazy thing to say. But anyway, so this man is an atheist. He's like, this does not reflect my beliefs. This is not helpful for me. And he withdrew from the program after only 5 days in it because he was uncomfortable. That's not a safe space for him if he's being told, if you don't believe in God, like you're going to go back to your old ways and start using substances again. So, unfortunately, at the time, going through that treatment program within the prison was a requirement for parole for him. So he wouldn't be able to get out of prison early on parole if he didn't go through this program that conflicted with his own personal beliefs. Luckily, a federal judge in West Virginia ruled that that is not constitutional. You can't do that because people have the freedom of religion. So what do you guys all think about this whole situation? Personally, I'm very happy it ended up the way it did, but he was denied parole 3 times before that ruling came out because he was not in that program.
I think you have to have minimum, like a respect for someone's individual beliefs. Like it's 2023, like you got to respect that. So I
Exactly.
think that's pretty nuts. You should be able to choose what you want and what you believe.
Yeah, I also read this story when it first came out, Meg, and I was so excited that this, like, I mean, not that this happened, but that this case made it to court, right? Because, okay, so I have had a lot of experience with religion, and I have removed myself from that because it caused me a lot of trauma in my personal life and all of that good jazz. And something I think people forget specifically in America is that freedom of religion also means freedom from religion. And like people don't get that. They just think, oh, you have to choose one. But sometimes the answer is not choosing one, right? Sometimes that's what's best for you. And so I think that this problem is actually way more widespread than it is. My own mother went through similar AA programs to get out of prison. And they told her the same things, that like if you're agnostic, you're doomed to drink forever, like all of this stuff. And it made it harder for her to achieve recovery because every single time she stumbled, it wasn't just, oh, I stumbled, I need support. It was, oh, I stumbled because I'm a bad Christian and I don't have enough faith. Like that's what that was her mindset. That was her mindset. It wasn't that she needed extra support or that she needed mental health treatment. It was that she didn't have enough self-control. So she needed to pray better for more self-control. And that like feedback loop in her mind really delayed her recovery journey, like by a lot, because she was just constantly feeling like it was that she was the problem, if that makes sense. And so I think that as we see more of these cases, I hope this becomes like the norm, that hey, when you go into prison, we have multiple pathways of treatment for you to choose from for what's going to be best for you in your life, right? Whether that is 12-step, whether it's faith-based, whether it's harm reduction, what have you. I think that should be the goal of the prison system. If we have to, if that's the only option, if incarceration is the only option, then the very least we can do is give multiple pathways of treatment once they're there. That's like the bare minimum.
Yeah, and I understand that it could get expensive for prisons to offer all of those treatments, but I think at the very least there should be some kind of program where you could like opt out and maybe you get like a book from, oh, what is it? I don't know. There's a secular recovery organization that has its own workbook. Like maybe instead of going through their AA-esque program that the prison's putting on, you should be able to maybe sign a form to opt out and say like, oh, I'm still going to be doing recovery things, just in a way that's more aligned with my personal views, my values, etc., etc. There should be options, basically.
Is it Smart Recovery? Is that the other one?
Yes,
Yes, yeah,
smart
they also
recovery.
have workbooks and like it's the same, like a big, massive curriculum that has evidence and is shown to be effective and works. That's a very good option, also.
I think
Yeah.
it's super
And I want to
important.
say, sorry, Erin.
I think again, super important, maybe even a YPR chapter or some sort of RCL that can be like implemented inside of prisons that
Peer
can
recovery
enforce.
supports, yeah. Peer
Yeah,
recovery
like
supports are cheap.
yeah. I mean, there's tons of organizations, RCOs, chapter, whatever that can come in and assist um, and provide programming to highlight
Yeah.
the steps or excuse me, highlight the multiple pathways.
Yeah.
There are plenty of volunteers, nonprofits that could provide these services for little to no cost if the prisons would just basically prioritize what the people in the prison want. And unfortunately, that is not a common theme that we see the wants and needs of inmates being prioritized at all or even taken into consideration sometimes. Yeah, but to kind of cap that all off, I do want to say that AA is effective for the people who it works for. Saraiha, in last week's episode, which at the time of recording is coming out tomorrow, but when this episode comes out, it'll be last week's episode. You were also talking about smart recovery with our guest, Lauren, and you said something very poignant, I think, that I just want to reiterate here. You said, what's a safe space for you may not be a safe space for everybody. And that is very true. You also said that in the context of religious treatment programs. But, it's important to acknowledge that different people have different needs. And sometimes a
100%.
secular program is what's going to fulfill those needs the best.
Exactly, yes. And that's not to like discredit that religious safe spaces can be safe spaces for the people who benefit from it. There's evidence too, like these are powerful programs that also work, but they don't work for everybody. It's also like medication. Like say somebody is depressed and they go to a psychiatrist, right? There's hundreds of medications and there's probably 4 that will work for that person, right? So it's like we're all unique individuals, and I think sometimes we get so clouded by our own passions and the things that we love that we just can't fathom that anybody else doesn't love or feel passionate about those things the way that we do. But sometimes that's just how it is. Sometimes other people need other things to be healthy, and that's okay. All we can do is support them and love them as they explore what they need. That's my point.
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the day, that's it. People are just different. Different needs, different wants. not everything's going to work for everybody, and that's just the way it is. And we shouldn't try to force people into the boxes of abstinence, 12-step, faith-based, smart recovery, because different people will respond to something different. And some of those methods might help many, many people while being actively harmful to others and their recovery progress. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for all of you lovely listeners today. I will, as always, link all of the articles that we referenced in the show notes. Feel free to reach out to us at our community at Young People in Recovery email address if you want to chat with us, suggest an article topic, anything like that. You can also DM us on social media. We are at Young People Recover on Instagram. It's like YNGPPL.
I
I
know.
love how you pronounced it because you pronounced it the way that I read it when I look at our Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
It was great.
I wonder if we could change it.
Anyway.
It might be worth considering. Before we hang up here, so I want to propose something, and I'm sorry if this catches everyone off guard, but we are in the middle of summer. It's festival season. Meg, Aaron, and I are going to a festival this weekend. To kind of just like leave everyone with like a healthy tip trick for maintaining recovery at a festival. Like, what are everybody's ideas on that?
Bring a buddy.
You start. Bring a buddy.
Bring a
Bring
buddy.
a buddy. Bring a support system.
Yeah, support system. Yeah, I'd say have like a carbonated beverage, like something to be drinking that's healthy, like some lemon water. I don't know, something that's like refreshing.
Yeah, something to keep your hands busy too.
Yeah.
Because like having a drink in your hand is such a big thing for people at festivals, especially for people who may not feel super comfortable in crowds. Just having something to do with your hands for anxious people is very important. So even if it's just water, like keeping your hands busy by having something that's, a non-alcoholic beverage could be very helpful.
I agree with everybody. And enjoy the music. That's why I go to festivals. For the music. It's the
Feel
best
the
part.
music.
Yeah, focus. My tip would be having an escape plan. Like if you're there on the buddy system, like have a code word or something, like have a plan to get home. If you didn't drive, have funds set aside for an Uber or whatever it may be, but just know your triggers and be able to get out of the situation if you encounter those triggers and become uncomfortable.
100%. Yeah. And make a schedule. Make a list of everything you want to see so that hey, I've got to do this. I got to do this. You've got your whole day. You're good. You're good to go. You're excited.
I'd say also locating like the kind of low stimulation spaces. So like a tree, just like something that's a little bit out of the festival, that's maybe not as loud, that can help you ground.
Yeah. All good tips. And thank you for bringing that to us, Lex. But with that, we will let all of you lovely listeners get back to your day. We hope it's a good one. Happy Wednesday if you're listening to this on the day it comes out. If not, happy whatever day. And just have a great rest of your week. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.